Well, that was great. If that doesn't illustrate how complicated selling online can be to the average person, then I don't know who better to dissect this issue more than Ralph Dangelmaier, CEO of BlueSnap, and DJ Murphy, editor-in-chief of CardNotPresent.com. For those who aren't familiar, BlueSnap is a payment gateway focused on cross-border payments and solving checkout challenges for thousands of global merchants. Please join me in welcoming Ralph Dangelmaier and DJ Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. Thank you all for being here. As Steve mentioned, I am the editor-in-chief of CardNotPresent.com. I know many of you have come from far away, and we really appreciate it. We're going to have a really great week. As the editor-in-chief, we're a small team. I know many of you know that. I am also a reporter, and in that role, I have had occasion to speak with Ralph Dangelmaier on several occasions, and it was not completely unbearable. So we invited Ralph back to talk about experimenting in payments. He's got some great ideas on this. We're gonna have a little chat together, and I just wanted to welcome Ralph to the stage.
Guys, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, DJ. Hopefully you can hear this. I'm finally glad we got out of the snow in Boston to be down here in the heat in Orlando.
Ralph and I are both Boston guys. Please excuse us. I think there's a lot of lemonade stands here in the audience. Probably not many as surly as our friend on the screen. They take a little more care with their customers, but at the end of the day, they want to do the best they can to sell as much as they can. And the challenge is, how do you do that? How do you take risks and get out of your comfort zone? And how do you build a payment infrastructure to take your lemonade stand global? So given all that and given those sort of thoughts, why don't we just start with what experimentation in payments means to you?
Well, I think it's really important to make sure that you build the right infrastructure to support all the entrepreneurship and all these starting businesses. And I think making sure that we understand where e-commerce, m-commerce, the wallets, all of this disruption that's happening in omni-channel, the cross-border explosion that's happening right now, which we're going to talk about, all of that has to be considered as you're launching your product. And we find that payments is always an afterthought. It's something that people think of afterwards, and it's not part of the product design. So I think it's really important that you experiment with payments, just like Jenny was talking about experimenting with your customers. It's got to have the exact same thing, and a lot of that's going to happen this year.
Okay, fantastic. If that's the case, sometimes we are in the weeds a little bit on it, and we don't take a step back to sort of look at the environment and what's going on. From a macro perspective, what's driving this? What should give online merchants the confidence to experiment?
Yeah, I think data is really important here as well, and I think payment data is important. And what we should really just quickly look at, I think we read this in the news every day, though, is just what we see with data. And we're still very, very early in online. About 7% of retail card sales is actually transacting on the internet or in e-commerce. It represents about $1.6 trillion of commerce. But the most interesting thing is, in the next 4 years, that's going to grow to $7 trillion. And this is where we're starting to coin the term the Internet of Things. And how do we handle the growth of the Internet of Things? And a lot of this growth is going to be driven mobile. Mobile is going to be huge. I think it surprises some people when they find out that mobile is only 10% of the Internet of Things. There's so much happening on the app. And a lot of that mobile transactions, about 80% of it is happening with about 10 internet applications right now. So it's growing about 50% a year, just exploding growth. So you need to really make sure that you design a mobile checkout part as part of your strategy.
Yeah, I know with so much room to grow, I know that the folks that I talk to have no conception of what an early stage we are still at on those type of things. But with that in mind, and this data in mind, why is it growing so much?
Well, DJ, I call it the 3 Bs. There's huge growth going on right now in the space. So I'm not sure everyone realizes 3 billion people are connected to the internet right now globally. 5 billion things are connected to the internet, and 7 billion people today have a device or a mobile phone. Those are astonishing numbers. And in that stat, people don't leave their phones they don't leave their phones without nearby. So 91% of the adults have their phones with them almost all the time. And I think what's amazing is when people are now watching TV, about 40% of the people watching TV are on the phones. And they're trying to do something else as they're watching TV. And people are building all kinds of apps to do everything. As a matter of fact, one of the stats we were talking about earlier, which I think is kind of interesting, is that you built a fantastic app here for the show. And quick survey we took having coffee this morning, and it said that 25% of the people are going to be on the app while they're in the sessions. And I think
Take my picture. Take my picture.
Start tweeting.
Yeah.
So this is commonplace for now for people to be doing something else as they're involved and engaged in other activities.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up mobile, and I think every show I've been at for the past 10 years, we've been talking about mobile. Consumer adoption hasn't always followed, and it seems it might be kicking loose a little bit this year. You have a big name with Apple Pay and a lot of things going on. Is this the year to finally, that businesses finally need to implement this and integrate it into their commerce?
Yeah, I'm calling this the year of the wallet wars. This is where the wallet wars really begin. And as you see what's going on in the wallets, just in the last few months, there's been incredible growth and incredible news on wallets. I mean, Apple, I think, led some of this recently this year, but there's been a lot of transactions, there's been a lot of activity, there's been a lot of U.S. involvement in leading mobile payments and people trying it. And I'm just curious in the audience, how many people have actually used one of these wallets out there? You know, more than I thought. About half of the audience has already tried and used one of these wallet wars. I think it's really interesting to realize how early we still are in the wallet and how the wallets have to be a key part of your strategy. But about 2 years ago, 90% of all of the mobile traffic on payments was going through a coffee company called Starbucks. Now, Steve and I drink Dunkin' Donuts, so we never tried that, but that is an astonishing fact, how early we are in the stats. The other thing I think is really interesting is there's a big missing player on this slide. I think people probably realize it. It's called the banks. Where are the banks? All of the innovation and disruption happening on the wallets is coming from technology companies or networks. Extremely interesting that we see that happening. So the banks are going to have to play a role in this if they want to keep up and they want to innovate and keep their customers on the front. I think the third point that is going on in the wallet wars is a lot of these wallets have started, and I would call it US-centric, with Apple and PayPal and Visa. And I can tell you right now, the other countries aren't sitting by the wayside. They're developing their own wallets all over the countries, and there's about 100 or so other wallets all around the world, and they're going to try to get a piece of the action as well. So this is going to get more complicated, more confusion, with more disruption, and I think it's time that you've got to start experimenting and trying some of these things out to figure out what best fits your customers and your products.
Yeah, and that brings up a great point about the international nature of it and how some of these wallets are coming from outside. You have this amazing number of devices out there that you mentioned. You have connected consumers all around the world. So this means we're now connected across borders. Should be fairly easily, but there's challenges. So what's the future for cross-border e-commerce in a mobile world, and how do you integrate that?
Yeah, so DJ, you're right. So if there's 7 billion phones out there, a lot of people think it's all US-based or maybe Europe-based, but obviously you just have to do the math on the population and know that's not the case. Cross-border is going to be a huge part of this. People are going to be buying on their phones, they're going to be buying on their apps, they're going to be looking for that easy checkout process. And I think it's astonishing that people realize that the cross-border payments on the phones is going at 40%. And today, it's about a $100 billion market, and all of the data points to it being a $2 trillion market. It's going to grow 20 times in the next 4 years. And not having a strategy for phone checkout and not having a strategy for cross-border checkout as you're developing your products, as you're trying to reach your target audience, doesn't make a lot of sense. Because we're seeing that 80% of the people want to try to check out on their phone, and they want to do it in what we're going to call cross-border. And just to define cross-border for a second, that is what it really means, is it's somebody who's got a card that's issued in a foreign country trying to buy from another country. So someone with a card issued in Spain trying to buy from the US, someone with a card issued in the US trying to buy from Spain. This is going to be a huge part of experimentation over the next year or two.
Okay. From a geographical perspective, what are you seeing? Where is this happening?
Yeah, again, I think, data is really, really important to look at where is it happening. I think it's happening in areas that most people would think. The Americas is a big market right now, still becomes a big market. There's a lot of talk about China right now and how big the China market is. Alipay has always come in with a bang, and they've taken a big presence, especially in Europe. A lot of people have downloaded the app, the Alipay app, and started paying with it. As a matter of fact, talk about social media influencers for a second. I'm sure you heard the story about how Alipay went to McDonald's and said, if you take a picture of yourself, a selfie, you will get a free Happy Meal. And that's how popular this stuff has become and how important things like social media are. Paying with a selfie, I think, is just an incredible new innovative way to pay and get social media. And then the last big area is Europe, but Germany's really leading the charge in Europe. So I know there's been a lot of talk about brick, and that's been a big economic indicator, but I think from an e-commerce point of view, we're going to flip that around, and we're going to call it CAG. Because we think it's really about China, Americas, and Germany. We think that's a good place to start experimenting if you're going to start going cross-border.
You brought up three really different markets. So do you pick and choose between them? Is there a way for a merchant to attack all three because you have different cultures, different languages, payment methods in different places? How are you going to deal with that?
Yeah, well, it depends on your products and obviously who's buying, but experiment with all three, I think, makes a lot of sense, and I think there's a couple ways to do it. We like to call it local, local, local. So for years, we've been trained to take our cards and swipe it at our terminal with our card present, and we swipe that in our language, in our currency, and with our local preferred payment type. But from an e-commerce point of view, we make people do things in a European way or an American way. And so there's a lot of what we call payment conversion that's being lost. So there's this abandonment from a shopping cart, but there's this other big data trend that we're going to start tracking called payment conversions. So what is this is someone that actually does want to buy, and their card's now getting declined because we haven't set up the right payment infrastructure by local currencies, local languages, and local payment types, or in a lot of cases we haven't set up what we call the local acquiring banks. So you're taking transactions from China or from Germany, and you're trying to get those transactions to get approved by a U.S. bank, and because of all the complications going on with fraud right now, people are tightening those screws and making that something that's harder to get those cards approved. So I think that's really, really important data to be looking at is what is your shopper abandonment rate, but what is what we call your payment card abandonment rate. And that's data that needs to be experimented and tracked with by most merchants.
Okay. Will there be convergence in those markets in the way you pay, or is it sort of, are we fighting disparate systems for a long time to come?
No, we're going to be fighting systems for a long time to come. I mean, it's very, very difficult to integrate all these things together. Yeah. And I think you're going to see a lot of friction as you try to do that. But you have to understand where you're having the success first before you jump into fixing that.
Right. So you've identified a couple of those regions that you think are important.
Yeah.
How do you go about building the right payments infrastructure to handle the growth?
Well, the whole payment infrastructure component is it's really what you really need to do is understand the data again, where your customers are coming from, what they're selling, what types of products, what currencies convert better. In some cases, we've seen the euro convert better than the sterling convert better than the euro. And there's a lot of data you got to collect and start looking at it. And this is an evolving process. I mean, it's not something that you set your payments up and you go. Someone has to be constantly monitoring and tweaking and working that and looking at data, just like people do with their shopping carts.
Okay, let's shift gears for just a second. We just heard from Jenny Fleiss from Rent the Runway, and she talked about testing and experimenting a lot.
Yeah.
She also talked about their shifting models and how they have used subscriptions and how that has evolved. So that's become a complicated, challenging thing, but something that merchants should be looking into, you would say.
Oh, I would agree, and I think what they've done is a really good job of understanding their business model was going to be a subscription model somewhere along the line, somewhere up front. And so a lot of businesses have started off not thinking of that and then trying to back into it. And it seems like that's something that needs to be obviously set up and always experimented with along the way, and need to be thinking of a couple things. What type of plan? How often the subscription is going to happen? Is it going to be a custom plan? Is there going to be flexibility in the plan? What do you do when the card expires? How do you retry cards? Where is the best what's the best price point. Maybe a card at $49.99 gets declined, but a card at $50 goes through. And really understanding the pricing and the subscriptions and the plans and how often and how that works through what we're going to call payment conversions and managing your declines and your retries. So it's a very, very critical part of experimenting through payments.
So you've talked about that. We've talked about mobile, new channels. We've talked about, then there's traditional e-commerce. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the room who came out of brick and mortar as well. So Jenny also talked about omni-channel. And I think anybody who's talking about experimenting from that perspective, this would be a big year, you think, for that?
Yeah, I think it's a good year to start trying with omni-channel. It's interesting because she went from e-commerce to the stores. A lot of people have stores and they're trying to say, where's your website and how do I buy online? I think there's some interesting data in omni-channels that we found. What I think is very, very interesting is about half of the people want to buy from the site and come in the store and pick it up. And I think this kind of gets to the fast pace, the convenience. I think it's a lot with people don't want to interact with people as much right now.
I know, I just want to get out of the house. Anybody with small kids, I'm sorry, I have a few small kids at home and sometimes I just need to...
Well, it's worse. We actually text in the house. We don't have conversations anymore. And so it's a very big part of it. So why do you have to deal with a checkout clerk when you can just buy online and go pick it up, you know what you want, you don't have to stand in line. So that's a very big deal. And the other thing I think is really important, it's going to drive down in-store sales over the next 2 years by about 20%. So this is something that people need to be ready for and need to be ready for brick and mortar. I think the other thing, which probably most people would agree with, is the influence of buying online is influenced by what you read. What you read in social media, but what you read online, but what you read in the reviews. So most people are doing their browsing or they're shopping now online before they go pick up something in the store versus the spontaneous buying. So that's a big point in reading and understanding what's going on in networks.
Well, and that also leads right into social and social media and social buying, which, speaking of experimenting, I mean, folks like Twitter and Facebook are experimenting with being able to buy right in social media sites. How do you think a social strategy is important, in 2015?
Yeah, I think social is critical. I mean, everybody has a social strategy. I think people are doing a pretty good job managing their social media, managing the Facebooks and the Twitters. But I do think that when you ask people, how does social media impact your payments? People almost don't have an answer for that. It's not thought of as part of the product strategy, as part of your payment strategy. They don't necessarily talk to their call centers. Like we had a great example of a couple of merchants who said to us that 30% of their calls into their call center came because of payment issues. And there was nobody there to catch and say, how do we fix those payment issues? What do we do? And then they start building up and the social media starts to become a problem for them on a payment. I love this product, but I can't get paid. I think the other thing that I find very, very interesting is when you buy something, and as Jenny just talked about, people are out celebrating it or talking about it. So, DJ, you buy a new pair of shoes. I don't know if you post those on the internet and tell people I just bought a new pair of shoes.
No,
but
this is the old white guy portion of the show. I don't necessarily...
Well, 40% of the people do that right now.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is 40% of the people do that, and what the impact on that is that's impacting about 70% of the people will buy something because your network has bought it. So the social buying is becoming critical and really, really important. And now you have the social media companies getting into payments, and they're driving about 5% of the volume in e-commerce, which I think is astonishing how quickly that's come along. So that's going to be a huge part of the strategy going forward, and it's something that everybody should experiment with.
And that sort of rounds out a lot of things that we've talked about. We've talked about the mobile wallets. We've talked about social, omni-channel, and subscription. It's all sort of coming together and converging, and this is the year you think that we should be doing this.
Yeah.
What's the next step? What comes after that?
Well, I think we have this phenomenon called the Internet of Things, and I think it's gaining a lot of traction. And I think what's really following that quickly is what I'm calling the payment of things, is how do you have a really easy checkout experience and how do you deal with this stuff? And so Apple Pay's just come along, but there's going to be a lot more innovations coming along. I'm sure people have heard stories of people actually getting bitcoins and chips surgically sewn into their bodies so they can actually go to a nightclub and not have to carry a credit card with them, or people with biometrics and fingerprinting, and now there's a new Jawbone product out. And we really, really believe that the localization and the devices, trying to pay as easy as possible, is going to just be something that you've got to be minding. I think the other thing that's interesting is I agree a lot with this concept of millennials. The millennials are really driving a lot of this new buying. The millennials are driving a lot of new strategies. And we've seen some logic that started to happen where people are being profiled online as to who you are and how you like to pay. And I don't think it's going to be long before we see people knowing this is a 25-year-old person. They typically, this is their profile, and they like to pay with Apple Pay, and people serving up or already identifying the way they're going to pay with things, just like you're served up or tracked online with other products. So we think the payment tracking is going to come on.
You'll customize payment just as you customize the products.
Exactly,
Yeah.
And the payment is going to follow right along, and understand how generous. I think that's a big deal. And then obviously there's a huge trend in subscriptions. I mean, that's just something that's just huge in the cloud or in demand, or that's a big deal. So I think making sure that you have a strategy that covers, as you talked about, the mobile, the idea of the wallets, and I think it's really, really important to make sure that you're tracking your data. Most merchants that we meet do not have a good handle on what we're going to call payment conversions by country, by currency, by payment type, and there's really a lack of understanding. They know their abandonment really well, but they've got to get the data on their payment conversion, and I think that's going to be a big trend in a couple of years.
Okay. We could probably talk about this for a long time, but I did get some late breaking news. It's about a company I think we're all familiar with. They were struggling a little bit, but they sort of looked at some of these strategies we've been talking about, and they've really, really started to take off. So let's take a look at that.
What company is this?
This is an ECNP News special report. Tonight, ECNP takes you inside the phenomenal growth of eLemonade, the $1 trillion-a-year company in the global lemonade industry. Billy and Susie Lyman started eLemonade as a way to make easy summer cash.
Why, do you want to buy some lemonade? It's really good.
From one lemonade stand, the company grew to a global powerhouse. In the U.S. alone, eLemonade has transcended class and income and can be found from the shelves of the social elite.
Oh my God. eLemonade is my fave. Even my little dog loves it. Don't you, little lemon?
To the swamps of backcountry hillbillies.
Where's the best star lemonade I've done tasted? I'll tell you that.
Why, you ungrateful!
So what is the secret to eLemonade's success? Experts point to the easy one-click checkout process, while others insist it's their ability to accept new and popular payment methods, such as Alipay, PayPal, and Apple Pay.
I can buy lemonade with this?
Lemonade.
But despite its innocent marketing campaigns, critics say Billy Lyman's abrasive attitude towards customers is a growing problem.
Whatever, kid. You're whack.
You're whack.
And with allegations of lemon caging and abusive juicing tactics, some wonder if eLemonade's mysterious co-founder, Susie Lyman, may be the company's solution. A recently obtained confidential PR video may shed more insight.
As our lemonade started flying off the shelves, we knew we had to grow. We needed to be able to take orders from around the world, online, instantly, with no issues. We needed one that could work on phones, tablets, whatever. We also fixed our foreign card problems by accepting local cards, local languages, and local payment types. And subscriptions for repeat customers? Yeah, we do that too. Because the more you make it easier, reliable, and secure, the faster you can grow your business. Like this.
This is so much fun!
So if you're still thinking that selling cross-border won't help your business grow, then you're whack.
This is breaking news. The CEO of eLemonade is issuing a live statement from the eLemonade headquarters.
Hello. As a true CEO of eLemonade, I'd like to clarify a few things. The internal PR video you have just watched was produced without the awareness or approval of eLemonade. My brother has been making a lot of these videos because apparently he cannot stop pretending he is still the CEO even after I demoted him to mailroom when our first E-Lemonade stand bombed.
Man, that's whack.
Secondly, all our lemons are free-range and organic. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. The original brainchild of E-Lemonade demoted to the mailroom. And by his sister.
Ah, that schmecks good.
Gesundheit indeed, Billy Lyman. Gesundheit. This has been an ECNP News special report. Now that's whack.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention this morning. We have a networking break right now in the exhibit hall. The exhibit hall is open. It's sponsored by ID Checker. So go in, connect, have some coffee and something to eat, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
Good job.
Yeah, you too.